Welcome back to the Wet Pastelist. I'm your host, Avon Waters, and this is where you learn wet pastel techniques, anything art, including how to block in paintings so that you can use wet pastel techniques, color theory, and composition. So today's episode is about one of many different ways to block in a painting. I'm going to show you how to block in a painting using monochromatic tones of gray, just with your white and your black pastel. And an easy way to begin looking at your source material, whether it's your own photograph or if you like painting outdoors, how to break down that into large shapes and then transfer that to a pastel paper where you can add color. So let's get started. This is the photo source that we are using. Nothing special about this. This is a 6x4 photo of just a grouping of trees. And if you squint at this, you can see the trees are the darkest part. And then the foreground, that little triangle, is a different shade of, in this case it's green, but when you squint down and lose the color, you see that it is a slightly different shade of gray than the blue sky. And then the white shapes for the clouds are the lightest. So I'm going to use this simple little composition from a photograph to show you how you can take your photographs and break them down into large shapes and then translate those shapes into gray values easily. Okay, go to your pastel box and get out your black and get out your white pastel. Those are the only two colors we're going to use, or hues, since they're not really colors, black and white. But one is at the end of the gray scale as the darkest dark, and one is at the other end as the lightest light. Now, as we break this painting down, we are going to break it down into three large shapes. This triangular shape here, this shape here, and the shape of these clouds. Probably this little bit of blue sky right in here, I'm going to lump into this shape of the clouds and cut this little notch out. So we have the blue sky and we have these clouds here as one shape. This is the largest shape in the painting, which is all dark, and this is a kind of a middle gray shape. Now, because we only have two colors, what I'm going to do is I'm also going to cut out this little wedge here and this little wedge here. And the white paper is going to represent these clouds as a white shape. Now, ultimately, you and I know that there's many shapes within this shape, but we're just trying to break this down. And you can do this many different ways, and this is just an exercise. You will not do this more than once just to get the feel of how to put this together. Since I'm starting here, I'm going to draw a line, and you could do this in pencil. And I want you to realize you could use a pastel paper, but I just took regular 8.5 by 8.5 by 11.5 typing paper. It's got enough tooth that this will stick to. Because it's an exercise, if you're using sanded papers, you may not want to do this on a piece of sanded paper because it's just an exercise to get you used to how this all works. Then we come in here and we try to draw. We've got this in the 1/3, so I'll put a little marker there, and I'm just trying to get some of the basic shapes into here. And you notice I'm drawing as though I had a pencil, and I'm drawing sideways, so I may not be as successful as if I were doing this in another way. Now, you can see in here there's some variation. We're not going to worry about that variation right now because it is a variation of this dark, but see, this variation is so much darker than any of these other tones. That variation is darker than this wedge. That variation is darker than the sky. So we're only looking for melding these variations into one large shape. Now, I'm going to do the sky shape, and I will use this. The sky goes across the top of that. We go up, we come out, and we got that little wedge right there. Remember this little blue wedge that comes in? We're going to keep that there. And I am taking this area and I'm melding it all together into one shape. So now we have our blue sky, we have our white clouds, we have our dark trees, and we have our green grass in the foreground here. Alright, so now I am going to take the side of this and I'm going to block in all my dark shapes, because it gets really easy to be confused with the various shapes when you've got just straight lines. And it becomes much easier to visualize if we block this all in. And this is my darkest dark. So I'm going to kind of press a little harder on this. Alright, and try to keep it the darkest dark. Now I'm going to blend this in, because as we blend, you could do this in charcoal also, by the way. You don't have to use the white and the black, but I want you to get used to mixing colors. And even though we're using black and white, this will show you how you can mix some of these colors. And that goes up a little bit, so you got a room, a little play here, a little play room, and things there. So now I've got my whitest whites, I've got my darkest darks, and I'm going to coat that just again to get it dark, because I need to have a middle tone, and if I just try to come down here I might get confused if I'm not used to doing this exercise. So again, this is an exercise just to teach you how to look at your photograph and get it filled in on a piece of sanded paper or mi-tientes or whatever substrate you're using. Okay, so that is my darkest darks. I put 2 coats on there, and now I'm going to make a lighter gray down here just by coming up into those darkest darks, and we're going to pull that down into there. Now I have a darker gray, and if it was still too light, I'm going to take my fingers now, and remember our clouds are going to be the white part. So now I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to just, without dragging too much color in there, I'm going to try to create a value, and I may come down in here and get some more. Try to create a value that is more like the blue sky. So darkest value, second darkest value, third darkest value, and our white paper is the sky colors. Now, people may be tempted to go in here and go, oh, I'm gonna put these little cloud marks in there. And you can, if that's going to help you, but at this particular point I really would like you to just try to keep it at this. Okay, now, next step. Let's get this on the paper that you're going to use. You saw me cut these things out. I speeded that up to not bore you to death, but we cut that wedge out, which was across here. All right. So I'm going to recreate this. This is a piece of sanded paper. See these stains? It's all buckled, and I washed off a failed painting or a demonstration, and that's just some stains that are left. It has nothing to do with this particular demo. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this piece of paper that is, I believe, a 9 by 12, and I'm going to recreate the drawing onto this by pasting the drawing onto here and just using this portion of the paper. Again, this is just an exercise to get you to see how you can start with big shapes. You'll get a full understanding of this once I start adding some basic color to block this in. But when you've got a photograph, you need to squint at it and create at least 4 different values. Your darkest value, your second darkest value, then we had our clouds up here. We had our clouds up here, and that leaves the second darkest value for these areas here. You see how we've recreated this? Because I want to leave the clouds, I'm going to just leave this on here, and I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to create a gray tone by putting some white over this shape. Now, those of you that are used to already breaking down your works into large shapes, we are just doing this for the beginners that have heard about using large shapes and blocking in large shapes, but aren't quite sure how to do it. And as I said, there's many, many different ways to do this. After I've put my white on there, which is what this will be, now I just stick a little bit, I don't press really hard, and I stick just a little bit of our black in there just so we can create a gray that is lighter than what this one down here is going to be. Okay? So we're starting with our, you could start at any point. You could start again with the darkest, but because I've got this white on here, I wanted to get that kind of gray in there so I could get rid of this white after I do this. So now, let's start with the darkest dark. And now we know where our white is, we know where our other is, and we can now come in here and we can block this in with our black pastel. Now, bear with me, I'm using black pastel because when we add color to this, what's going to happen is we could put the same color over these trees as we do down here, but because of the black underneath, it is going to tint the green color that we would have down in the foreground. So this is why I'm trying to show people how going from large shapes, they can block in an idea from a photograph that they see. And again, I'm going to blend this in. I can take this off now. And I'm going to blend my, just like we did on the regular typing paper. We're going to blend this all in. And we could use pipe foam, we could use our finger, we could use different blending tools. I've got a whole episode using about 6 or 8 different blending techniques and it illustrates how different blending you get different effects. So I'm not too concerned about some of these skips and jumps in here because the color is what we're going to add over this. And we want to wipe as much of this off as we can because we want that texture to fill up with actual color that we'll be putting into there. Okay? So now I can add my white clouds in here. And I've got some of that black on just like we did when we had this on typing paper. We can use the fingers to move this around and create different effects and subtleties. But again, we're just after those basic shapes, and the reason we used that paper was so beginners could see how that blending process on a piece of typing paper before they got to their sanded paper can work. So those are our clouds. Now, I'm not concerned. Clouds have variation in them, but already you can start to see some shape occurring here. And I could go in here and I could add just a little bit more of this black and mix it in to create some cloud edges. So I'm already starting to get some of that modulation and separation. And here's our photograph. Remember that little part right in here that I said we were going to put into this and just keep it? And there's some little pieces of blue sky through here. I can get some of that black, and I can come in here and just lightly put in some of those separations, and then go back in here, and it reminds me that I want to have those clouds with a little blue-gray in there. So now we've still got this one. All right, remember how we did it the first time? Because we got this dark enough, we could come in here, put this in, and we've already blended this, so it's our unblended area. And we put a little white over it. And we can create this secondary. Remember how we pulled up into there and brought some of that down? We can do that too. But you play with this white and this dark a little bit here until you get that shade of gray that is darker than the sky peeking through, but lighter than your trees in the background. If these were houses or barns or buildings, you could do this in right on your sanded paper. But this is an exercise. You're not going to do this any more than one time, just to see and experiment how to blend gray tones and break your photograph down into shapes. So if you started this thing in the middle, this is an exercise for somebody who's not broken their photographs or their scene down into large shapes, to see how we took all these very clouds and all these little specks of blue peeking through and turned it into one big shape. All these trees that you can see in the photograph, or if we were in person, all this variation, we blended into a big shape. Now we're going to add color over the top of this. For those new to color theory, when you add white to a color, you get a tint. When you add black to a color, you get a shade. So everywhere that we have white, and even in these areas, we are creating some tints. So if I wanted a blue sky but had, let's go back to our source again, I had all these little highlights, I'm going to put this blue in over some of these areas, and it's going to mix with the white, and it's going to give me some tints. So we've started to have a blue sky. Now, up in the top corner here, and this little wedge, remember we had a darker blue in there. So I've selected a blue that's a little bit different, but still in the same family of hues. And it is mixing with that gray that we put down. And it's creating a much subdued color than if I were to put this on the white area. And we had those little pieces through here that we wanted to remember to peek in there, the little sky holes in the clouds, so to speak. So now with the same principles, I have selected some earthy greens out of my box, okay? And these earthy greens, you can see this one's lighter. I'm going to start by putting it down in this area, and it is mixing with that black and the white and creating kind of a hybrid earthy subdued green down in there. This is brighter green than this one, but when you hold them side by side, this is darker than this one. So I'm going to try in some of these dark areas to put some of this over there. And I'm not pressing hard, I'm letting some of the black show through, because we want to modulate this eventually and create, remember all those little trees, all these little areas where the light hits the edge of the limbs, and this little row of trees that comes across this area right in here. We want to use some of this but keep some of the stuff in the background that is dark. So I'm just putting a little bit in there, and we're going to rub this in. And there's sky holes that need to be put in up here. See where all these limbs go up? We're going to put some sky holes in there, but that occurs near the end. I'm keeping the big shape. And I'm going to leave this dark down in here because I can drag some of this green as I mix it. I can drag some of this green. This becomes a green-black, and those of you that have some sets, some schminky sets, green-black is number 170 through 178 or 9, I think, the sminky green-black color. And it is a wonderful, wonderful stick to add to if you're doing, where your trees and landscapes have green trees and things. But that sminky 177 is very popular among some of my friends. And you can see, this is just roughing in. We're just trying to rough in and now start to define this. And I'm taking that other color and I'm going to now put in a little bit of this and some of these branches. So we get when we get past the blocking in stage, then these are just guideposts that help us, by looking at our source, start to put in some of the darks. These will become a little lighter. We want to get a little light on some of these branches and in this tree. And we can start to look at our source a little bit here. And these are nice sharp edges, so this is a perfect time to go outside of the lines. Once you reach this particular point, remember I only used 3 colors out of my box. I only used 3 greens out of my box, and I used 2 blues out of my box. Everything before that was just black and white. And that black is what created our tones and tints that get us blocked in and give us the idea. And I used that lighter green to create some of these places where the sun hits the edge. I went outside of the lines, and it's a great time to go outside of the lines to create something rather than those sharp lines that were there. Now I have not put our sky holes back in there. I could easily put them in if you want to remember where they are by just adding the blue and getting some of those in there where the sky intrudes into that. And that will mix with some of the greens and things, but we don't want sharp edges there anyway. So you could add those sky holes now. I like to add them later and usually take some of the pastel off of those areas. But you can see we've got some basic shapes there. There's 2 ways to proceed. Because I'm a wet pastelist, I'm going to destroy this slightly using a liquid. I've got water in here. This could be alcohol, this could be Gambasol, this could be acrylic medium, anything wet that would go over and mix with the dry pastel. You could use wet pastel techniques to take this beyond where it is now. If you're not into wet pastel yet and you haven't watched my other videos, now's the time you start pulling other colors in the green hues and the blue hues and the violet hues to adjust your clouds and the grays in the sky. And you can use some of these modulations that we got where it didn't mix all the way with the black, and find places for clumps of grass. So this is the beginning stage. This is how you can, if you've never mastered breaking things down, it's a simple little exercise and it will teach you a lot, so that from that point on you're not having to do cutouts. If you have some drawing skills, you could do this directly without the cutouts But the cutouts allow you to take different shapes and move things around too. We didn't do that in this, but other images might be that way. So I'm going to dip into my liquid. Again, it could be anything. And I'm going to go over the lightest areas first. So if you wanted to use wet pastel techniques, this is a good way to do it, because this liquid is going to also go underneath there and pick up some of those tones, that the tints and some of the shading using the gray that's underneath these things. Now see, there's an area where we had a little bit more charcoal gray underneath, but the wet pastel techniques, if you take this step rather than go into this, you can start to create some modulation, and it gives you a ghost to follow, but not be a slave to the shapes that are there. So more advanced artists may want to then take this into the wet pastel realm, which is what this channel is all about, is teaching wet pastel techniques. This is a good way to get started, and I'll finish out this and you'll see how those colors kind of blend together, and when this dries you'll have a modulated image. We're not too concerned, because as more skilled artists, they can put in all those branches and details that we lose when we destroy this. But the destruction process is part of the wet pastel technique. So once you master getting these larger shapes, then you might try to, you've got your template if you cut those things out and use, so you could do this several different ways with several different mediums. Now I'm going to go up in here and get some of that gray sky in there. It mixes with that green, brings a little of that up in there, and we had this wedge in here, and I'm going to come down in here and get some of that green and put some of those variations up in there. Remember, we had this wedge right in there too. Okay, so, and then we come on down here, and this will dry a little bit lighter, but right now it looks like it's blending into those trees. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that exercise and demonstration. Hopefully it helps those that haven't really learned how to take their photograph. It's a way to kind of cut and paste, use our first grade cutting and pasting and coloring skills, and put them to good use. My first grade pasting and cutting skills seem to be something I use every day. I don't use algebra that often, but I use my paste and cutting skills from first grade. So it's a great way to introduce and let you recreate by using those templates. Like, if you mess up the first one, you've got your cutouts and you can mark around them and try it on another piece of paper. You don't even have to use mi tintas. You could do it on cardboard, you could do it on another sheet of thick index card paper or something like that. You'll get the idea. And once you master breaking that photograph down into shapes, you can abandon the cut and paste, and you'll see how just using black and white may help some people learn how to add color and keep those values in register with one another. So until next time, so long and happy painting, everybody.